Um,
Yes,
Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. It's great to welcome everybody to the sixth of our seventh part lecture series entitled Architecture in Civic Service. I'm very pleased to welcome, Peter Swinnen, a good friend and a longtime supporter of the Berlage, to give this sixth lecture where he will explore let's say the possibilities and improbabilities of the open call in a lecture we originally entitled Flanders, the Bouwmeester's Flanders, just for a kind of let's say congruency in an overall lecture series. But I'm always glad that Peter, as a provocateur, has changed the title to Provoking Public Architecture. We invited Peter today, for multiple reasons. One, he has co-founded a few years ago the practice CRIT, which is very much a kind of, let's say, I would say, critical practice in a kind of, for a new kind of world. He was the Vlaams Bouwmeester, the Flemish government architect, from 2010 to 2015, where he really pushed a public mandate for empowering architecture as a policy questioning discipline. Very respectful of that work. Prior to that, he did his apprenticeship with Luc Deleu, who, for those of you that do not know him, I think is actually one of the most, let's say, coolest and provocative architects on the Belgian scene in all senses of the word. Very erudite and utopian at the same time. And but after that, he co-founded the well-known Office 51N4E in 1997, and he was a partner there until 2014. At any rate, I'm very pleased to have Peter with us today to share his experiences, both of the open call from multiple perspectives. One, from basically the possibilities of starting a young office in the late 90s and the opportunities that maybe this gave to that creation, to then being the one that, as the Vlaams Bouwmeester, had to basically set an agenda from that experience within reality. And maybe I should note in that also it was, I remember at the time of his appointment, he was basically, quote unquote, a young architect, which was something different, measured against the, let's say the more senior figures that had basically taken on that role. So that was a very risky proposition there. And then finally, to think about, after one has had that role, how do you create then a new practice that basically reflects on those everyday realities, and how does one continue to, let's say, fight or flight in that respect? Anyways, thank you, Peter, so much, and we look forward to your talk.
Thank you, Solomon. Maybe just as another intro, Luc Deleu, we just put out a book on Luc.
Ah, nice.
So I can send you a link if you want to. It's on sale. And we open an exhibition on Luc as a curator 28th of April in Antwerp in the Single, where we show 50 years of his work in a slightly obnoxious selection or unadapted selection. So
perfect.
All welcome to physically be present in Antwerp, I think. Okay. So I was asked to give a presentation based on the Bouwmeester's mandate. I will briefly try to explain it. And I will also try to look from different angles from it. So not just celebrate it, but also question it or problematize it as much as possible. And now I should, wait. Now I should go. All right. You see this one? Yeah. 1999. It's visible. It's running okay. So the Flemish government architect, the first one was installed 1999. You see here Bob van Reet, architect, Belgian architect. And on his right, Wivina de Meester, who was back then the minister in charge of everything which had to do with housing the Flemish administration. She was pivotal for installing the Bouwmeester, which in a way was a slight copy of the Rex Bouwmeester, so the Dutch version, you probably all know. And it's a 5-year mandate. So in 2005, the second one, Marcel Smets took position. I was the third one in 2010. And by now we are more or less at number 5 and even 6, I think. So it's a kind of ongoing relay of 5-year mandates. As you can see, unfortunately, only white males. And hopefully the next one will be at least a woman architect. But the interesting thing about the Bouwmeester is that you are asked to practice at the same time. So it's not a full-time position. It's a bit more full-time than the Dutch version. There it's, I think by now, what, 30 or 40%. In Flanders, it's an 80% position. And importantly, it's a team. You have a team of more or less 20 people of experts, spatial experts in numerous fields that can actually also help you to develop a program on 5 years' time. The initial reason to install the Flemish government architect was rather almost banal. As you can see here, this was, or even partially still is, the way the Flemish administration is housed in Brussels today. So these are promoter developments which are rented or leased or other formulas. And the second reason to install the Flemish government architect was actually to start to work, because without a clear plan, but start to work with this Flemish condition, which is a Northwestern European condition of sprawl, and start to also work with local public clients, such as cities, municipalities, etc. In a condition that, as you can see here, let's say in 70 years' time would almost turn completely red. Not that the Bouwmeester can actually change anything about that fundamentally, but at least some acupuncture could be possible. And if we look at all the things, politically, all the administrations, energy, education, healthcare, sports, they're all vertically organized. Ideally, architecture and planning cuts through them and combines them and connects them. That's my, let's say, ideal scenario. Of course, reality is slightly different. I'll start briefly to show you the open call procedure, because I think it's highly specific also on a juridical level for Flanders. So it doesn't exist elsewhere at the moment. Here you see a print screen of the Bouwmeester website, unfortunately only in Dutch. And you see here the open call, open oproep. By now, so over a period of almost 20 years, 700 projects have at least been put on the table, not necessarily realized. And on the right, you see a booklet I put out, I think in 2014-15, with the state of affairs at that moment. It was slightly less than 700 projects, but a kind of guide book. It's a small pocket book for public principals or future public clients. And how does it work, this open call? So you have the client here, you have the Bouwmeester and his team, and an architectural or designing team. It starts with a thorough preparation. So an open call is in a way not as a normal tendering procedure. It starts with the establishment of what's called a project definition. This is not the program, but it's what kind of societal ambitions should this project aim for. So establishing this project definition, and it's also why we have the Bouwmeester team, because they help the public clients to construct it, to build it up. And that actually is then put out towards architects from which we can then select. Okay, step one. So the Bouwmeester team, they collect potential briefs or potential urgencies from certain public clients. So we gather them, they are put together. By now it's of course via a website. Back in the days it was slightly different. In a way, architects, they can choose what kind of projects they would like to, where they would like to be a candidate for. They submit their portfolio, quite light portfolio. The team, Bouwmeester team, checks these portfolios, selects 10 per project. And I think that's the most interesting, most difficult part in the whole procedure. So there is a kind of gentleman's agreement that the Bouwmeester can pre-pick 10 candidates for the client. That's a tricky one. I mean, also juridically speaking. But that's, I think, the unique element of the open loop. And in a way, the team makes sure that sooner or later, hopefully, every interesting architect will be picked at some point. Then the 10 candidates or 10 architects are proposed to the public client. The public client chooses 5, and that's his or her prerogative. So there's no interference of the Bouwmeester. The whole thing is launched. So you have a site visit for the 5 teams, 2 kind of moments during, normally an open call design phase takes 3 months, and you have 2 phases to have a exchange with the client. You submit the portfolios, you present it, and in the end, a winner is chosen. This results, let's say, in a high variety of projects. A school in Brussels, a crematorium, a bridge somewhere near the sea, an esplanade in Antwerp, again in Antwerp, opera, Mechelen, Holocaust Museum, library, school, public space, provincial headquarters, elderly home, cultural infrastructure, care infrastructure, library, and more, and quite a lot. And I think that's also the big importance of this whole thing, is that there is a big critical mass of what could potentially be called good projects. They all vary. I personally don't feel that there is, or I hope there's no kind of stylistic continuity or whatever. The only continuity is that the public client is, we try to address the public client and make sure that a certain kind of capacity building can start to rise, because some clients come back time after time, so there are no unique clients. And by now, I dare to say that there is this kind of building culture that is sustained also by the open call as a procedure. I want to highlight very briefly 4 open calls, well, 3 open calls and 1 call to the market, where I personally also where we pushed extremely hard to get it done, and it didn't always succeed. I'll start with this one. Probably know of Xavier de Geerter Architects, the provincial headquarters in Antwerp, now finished, where the client, so the client is the province of Antwerp, a public client. Initially, they contacted us and that they wanted to do a PPP, so a public-private partnership. And we took the first 6 months to A, listen to them, and B, convince them that a PPP should not be necessary, because actually they had the funds to do so. They didn't have the expertise or skills to do so. So we made sure that they felt sustained, underscored, and very, very quickly afterwards, this thing took off, and very, very quickly the whole thing got built as well. So in a way, I think it's a quite successful version of an open call. A slightly less successful is the one for, and these are all quite big ones, right? So open call varies, let's say, from €1 million investment to 120 million investment. That's more or less the scope. So this one is more towards the 100 million. For the broadcasting company in Brussels, the Flemish broadcasting company, where again the client was already venturing into a call to the market. They had already 40 dossiers on their table. And by accident, and truly by accident, that moment I knocked on the door and literally they said, like, would you like to have a look at the pile of 40 dossiers? And also there we took time to go through it. And after one session, we communally agreed that none of the 40 dossiers actually fitted their needs or their ambitions. And then what? So we took, again, a couple of months to explain them how an open call could work. And in the end, they accepted. Organized a thing, high-level jury, 5 fantastic candidates. And Robrecht and Dam came out as winner. Unfortunately, a year and a half later, for reasons not completely known to me because I was already out as Bouwmeester, but the architect and the client didn't no longer understand each other. So the whole thing got cancelled. And at the moment, it's going back again to a PPP procedure. The third one is the MUCA, the Museum for Contemporary Art in Antwerp, near the Skelda River. See here. This is the current museum. Maybe you visited it, I don't know. But it's a very strange thing. And it's as all museums today, or most of the museums, it's unadapted to the current or contemporary needs and too small. There we actually started literally from scratch, and even on the Bouwmeester's budget, we organized sessions with experts first, trying to convince and the museum director and all the political levels that a new museum could be a good option. It took more or less, in the end, 7 years. And I think 6 months ago, normally the laureate or the winner for the open calls would have been announced, but political powers ruled differently and the whole thing got annulled. And then the fourth one, this is a call to the market. This is actually headquarters, the current headquarters of the Flemish administration in Brussels. So in a way, the basic reason why the whole Bouwmeester thing was ever put in place, where the administration and the ministers, they decided, this was 7 years ago, to put out a call to the market. In the end, 5 were chosen. Funnily enough, or maybe not funnily enough, so these were 5 developers. 4 out of 5 developers had the same architect, Jasper Eyers. And one had a different one, which is this one, is Neutelings Riedijk. And this was not, of course, the main criterion, on the contrary, but it was simply the best project and it gave the best guarantees for a future presence of the administration in an alive way in the city fabric of Brussels. For the open call, allow me also to briefly show one personal project we developed. So before I had the mandate as Bouwmeester, as Solomon referred to, I mean, as a young office, I mean, it gives you certain chances because you don't have to have, you have to build 5 hospitals before you can apply for building a hospital or designing a hospital. In this case, it's and the reason why I want to show this because it's actually, I think it's a fascinating, impossible, maybe Belgian mix of programs. It's a kindergarten and greenery services for a local park. 2 programs which don't go together, which in a way we're claiming the same space for numerous administrative reasons. So the combination of these 2 scales, let's say these 2 degrees also of fragility or of non-fragility, in a way gave rise, and here you see the designed volume. So you have the park, symmetry, And actually the two functions, by putting them together, and so the inclined roof is everything that has to do with the greenery services. The round volume is the kindergarten, and it produces beautiful mixtures on a very local level between uses and atmospheres, as you can see here. Even with a peeping window towards the cars, the big cars, and the children adore this moment where these kind of things actually emerge. And the reason why I show it is that even within the procedure of an open call, because I mean, this could have probably also been designed as two buildings, you know, sitting on more or less next to each other. But the good thing is that the open call attracts public clients who dare, who take certain risks and are open for ideas even in a competition phase. And this is AG Vespa as a client, which is the public Antwerp body of for public tenderings. Voila. So I think open call is important in a way, in that sense, to empower clients, public clients who are maybe willing but don't know how to do it. Maybe the only thing I can say is that it takes an enormous amount of effort, let's say, and you cannot leave your clients as a team Vlaams Bouwmeester. You cannot not supervise them. So you really have to be on it full time. So it's extremely not a tiring process, but it's an extremely intense process. And it can always go wrong, as I showed previously in some of the key projects. When I had accepted the Bouwmeester mandate, I mean, and I maybe have to stress that it was not something which was on my wish list or bucket list. On the contrary, I was 37 years old at the time. The office back then was growing, flourishing. So why the hell would you accept another type of job and try to merge the two? But at the same time, I find it important that even, you know, with an experience, a practice-based experience, that you could start to, in a positive way, infiltrate certain administrative layers or even political layers. At least that was my ambition. And one of the things that we tried to put on the table is called the pilot projects, because the open call is a good instrument, but if it's only the open call, I think it's a very poor condition. I think you have to have a kind of multitude of instruments. And so this is my ambition statement at the beginning of the period in 3 languages, called 7 Memos for an Enlightened Building Culture. And what struck me, and this is also mentioned in this note, is that the Bouwmeester is hired by the government, right? This is the government at the time. These are all the ministers. And with none of them, we had a project. So all the projects we were doing were with local entities, local public entities, mainly based on the open call, but like the big projects and the big processes were escaping our attention completely. And at the same time also, I mean, more and more this PPP, this is a scheme of Schools for Tomorrow, a big, I think it's in total something like 250 schools built over a period of 10 years. And spot the architect. So the architect is truly kind of peripheral figure within this whole scheme. And we can lament about it, but I don't think we should lament about it. I think the architect is partially also to blame why it's in such a position. But for that, we wanted to offer different possibilities for architects or architectural practices to take certain risks or to challenge public clients beyond the open call. Here you see 3 booklets on collective living, on invisible care and productive landscape we put out. And the strategy we took on board was to check with which minister we could get some pilot projects going. The aim was 5 years. We select 5 projects, hence 5 public clients. We merge 5 architectural teams to them, and we get a carte blanche on a juridical level, so on a legislation level, to test certain things. For instance, in care, certain materials cannot be used, or certain combinations, spatial combinations are completely inconceivable on a juridical level. I think you can use architecture to test this, build it, test it truly, and then translate it back again to legislation. So the pilot projects, in a way, used architecture as a tool, not as an end in itself, to change parts of legislation, hence that other future projects could also benefit from this new freedom. So we had the pilot projects Invisible Care with the Minister of Health, the collective housing pilot projects with the Minister of Housing, the schools with the Minister of Education, the productive landscape with the Minister of Agriculture, the black fields failed completely, but that was the ambition, but it didn't go through. And then the pilot projects in the arts with the Minister of Culture. I show you, I'm not going to explain it. You can check it also on the website. But so for each project, and as you can see, these were also very interesting architects each time. So we had and a good client on board who wanted to go beyond the status quo. We had architects on board that are able to go beyond as well. And potentially we also had the political powers that be on board that were at least open to allow this experiment to happen. By now, most of these projects are built, so are in the testing phase. It's a bit longer than 5 years. I was too optimistic about that. But so I hope that the phase towards legislation will happen in that sense soon. And this is the collection of 5 projects for collective housing. But as you've maybe noticed, we were not able to address all the ministers with the pilot project. So we have 3 still slippery ones that we couldn't get our hands on. Just to give you one example, the left one, it was at the time Minister for Spatial Development and Energy. So extremely important for our team. So we invited them over to the atelier, we did an interview, and the quote or the title became, if people want to live in a remote way, so not close to the city center, it will become more expensive tax-wise. So it's in a way a rather daring quote. So this was October 9th, 2012. October 10th, 2012, Parliament opposition questions. October 11, 2012, a press release from the minister, remote dwelling shall not become more expensive. So it's extremely difficult in that sense to get a kind of hold on political slippery practices. So nevertheless, so in the ambition notes, I slipped in this rather stupid diagram, or kind of straightforward diagram. It's the map of Flanders with 5 transboundary zones projected on it. So each orange thing is potential transboundary link either with another country or another region or with the sea. And we baptized the whole operation Laboruimte, so it's a lab spatial laboratory. And then we tried to address at least 3 of those 5 zones to the 3 missing ministers. First thing we did together with AWB, we, let's say, more or less hijacked the Belgian pavilion in Venice and was under the title Ambition of the Territory to set a kind of potential blueprint to look at the region more as a whole within the Euro Delta, as you can see here. And then so the minister in charge for the sea, we worked with them for the infamous Belgian coastline. As you probably know, it's 70 kilometers of built space, hardly any kind of natural space. And we projected 4 speculations on it. Again, none of those speculations were intended to be final results, but some of them were quite going beyond things. For instance, here, if we would simply accept nature, half of the Belgian coast would flood and the other half could become something more productive. Of course, I don't know how, but it leaked to the press, and then these kind of things, Belgian coastline to be split in half. Of course, something that the minister doesn't like to read, and also that the local politicians didn't like to read. With the Minister for Brussels, we developed Metropolitan Landscapes as a publication. And with the last one, the Minister of Energy and Spatial Development, there we put, amongst other things, a study on the table on deep geothermia, because a part of Belgium could have this kind of capacity. And this is still at the moment still under development, together also with VITO, which is the Technological Institute of Flanders. But here you see at least 3 instruments, and of course the open call is maybe the most kind of cunning one, or the most kind of appealing one, because it has a quite rapid result-driven output, namely architecture, but not all times. I think the pilot projects and the Laboruimte for me are as important as instruments. And by now, I mean, I'm not going to go through them all, but I think the Atelier Vlaams Bouwmeester has at least 6 or 7 instruments to their disposal. And I think that's really important, that whatever type of public client comes their way, they can actually provide them with a potential procedure or a potential way forward. And one last thing for this part of the presentation is that, again, the main reason to install the government architect in 1999 was the administration housing problem, in a way. When I started here on the 2nd level, on this was actually my office space with the team. So imagine you have to talk to public clients about the quality of architecture. You have to invite them over, and they come to such a kind of mockery of a building. So very quickly we installed the Atelier Bouwmeester, which also there I went to see once the Atelier Rijksbouwmeester, this physical space. So it's slightly inspired on that as well. And I don't know if you know Brussels a bit, but this is the center of Brussels. This is the Royal Park. And we took the Ravenstein Gallery, which is one of the beautiful Art Deco places next to the central station, which you see here. So in the Rotonda, we found an empty space. Together with New Architectuur Atelier, we developed a concept for different subrooms in this space, which allowed us to invite people, which is really important. I think if you are serving in a public capacity, that you can be a host, which was impossible in the other space. That where you can, you're of course not a kind of cultural institution, but you can also exhibit. You can have the presentations. This is an open call presentation, and with a curtain. So if the discussion got too hot, the curtain would close, because what you see, I mean, where the picture is taking, this is public space. Right, so it's like a shopping window, as you can see here a bit, the library, but also we did a lot of public presentations, which were really nice. So the fact that you could invite people over, have speculative sessions like this one. This is an artist's session, but even for ministerial press conferences, this was a Minister of Housing. And very importantly, a good kitchen where all the best talks happened. To round up the session, I think it will take maybe 10 to 15 more minutes. By now, so the mandate was a 5-year mandate, so I stopped in 2015. And by now, from time to time, we again participate to the open call, but not that often. And this one was actually a call that happened, I think, almost 2 years ago for a project in Ghent for the cluster you see here. There you see the candidates which were selected. So I think it's, so we did participate together with Lacaton Vassal. You had 51 N4E with NU, l'AUC, De Veldering Tailleux, and one I cannot see because I have the other, all your faces are above it. So the question asked by this open call was actually for this building plot, which is a Congress Center. And this thing in the middle, which is a former exhibition hall from the World Exhibition at the beginning of the 20th century for the flower show. It's called a Floralian Hall. And the ambition, so for this open call, was actually to merge those two functions. But as you can see around it, you see a lot of other actors. So you have the SMAC Museum for Contemporary Art, you have the Museum for Old Art, you have Casino, which is actually by now an empty place. But Kuipke is a velodrome, which is used 6 days a year for a very important popular fest on cycling. Here you see the building of the Congress Center. And I show you these things because this is also, if you imagine if you would participate, this is the info you get, right? So these are the things which they also put on the website. This is the expo hall inside the Congress Center, outside. The other end of the expo hall, a kind of concrete addition built later. And if you look at the model, so again, the dotted line shows the question. So how can this Congress Hall and the Expo Hall become one? Apparently, the political powers that be that deal with tourism were ready to put a lot of money on the table for that. And I must say that from day one, we questioned the question, because I don't think it was the right, in a way, question. Why would you, especially now, enhance or enlarge a Congress Center? And also connect it to this hall in a singular manner, knowing that the museum and, for instance, the velodrome would not be addressed. Funnily enough, because we asked the question numerous times, could we have an exchange with the museum and the velodrome? And this was within the competition not possible. Nevertheless, we took it on board. So on the right, you see the museum director. We contacted them during the competition. I mean, officially, we were allowed to, but it was maybe not fully appreciated by all the institutions. And in a very natural way, we started talking with the SMAC. So the SMAC is here. They had already a study done by Oyo architects a couple of years prior, because also the SMAC, a bit like the MUCA, needs more space, needs more up-to-date space. But if they would add everything, they would get this kind of a gigantic ZIT building envelope, which of course, I mean, already the Congress Center is huge. So it would be a kind of impossible balancing act. And we proposed in a very kind of natural way during our discussions, what if we could, see the museum on both edges of this hall, which would in a way be very interesting, because all of a sudden then the Congress Hall would be surrounded by cultural amenities, which I think can only be beneficial for the financial balance of the Congress Center. So here you see the sketch that we proposed during the competition, and we voluntarily proposed a sketch, because of course this was not the question of the competition. The question of the competition was this thing, right? And we also produced this scheme, so showing that Floralia Hall should remain a public space, not become kind of privatized hall in a park for one actor. To produce also, and that's quite important, an underground enlargement so under the hall, and then to have two heads for the museum. The two heads came also from this original plan of the whole complex. This is from the World Exhibition, 1913. As you can see, a beautifully symmetric plan. By now, the whole thing is kind of à la Belge. It's being one thing after another has been added. So the overview is completely gone. And again, this question of merging this brutal or post-brutalistic Congress Center with this lofty exhibition hall. Even to this date, I think it's a very strange question. And so we tried to address this. We tried to address it. So these were a couple of pictures that we produced for the competition, as you can see here, even the model, and inside hall, but already emphasizing this presence of the SMAC museum. In the end, so we made it to from 5 architects, they boiled it down to 2, so we made it to the last round. So below it's our proposal, above is the winning proposal by 51 Enforie and New Architecten, so we are out. But the interesting thing is that it took, although we were in a way civically disobedient and didn't fully address the question that was put on the table, it made the jury doubt for a long time. So we were for a long time in the running. And I do think that we brought questions to the table. And I think it's also a bit of our role to do so, even within competitions, questions that are not necessarily asked for, but that are crucial for the larger whole, or the future for the larger whole. And in this case, it's the park. So the day we knew we were lost, we got again a call from the director, the museum director, said like, Peter, we're not going to stop now. And I said, no, I mean, we started something, although we don't know what yet. And knowing that Philippe van Kouteren, so the director, already has been in position for 15 years. And for 15 years has been trying to advocate for having a bigger museum, more up to date. And for 15 years, nothing actually happened, despite the fact that the SMAC, and if you don't know the SMAC, please do visit it. It's a fantastic institute, I think, not only for contemporary art. I mean, it's an important player in the city and also in the park, the Citadel Park. And just here you see, for instance, this is one of the Vito Acconci projects. At the back, you see the Congress Center also. I mean, just a kind of Godzilla-like presence of the Congress Center in the park. But so the SMAC, I mean, time after time, they come up with proposals or informal proposals to actually make their museum look bigger. This is another installation by Panamarenko, for instance, here in the hall. Then in 1986, they organized Chambre d'Amis, which is an infamous cultural manifestation. Again, if you don't know it, check it out. This is the room Daniel Buren made. It's called Le Décor et son double. And then in the almost 1999, the SMAC got the approval to expand. So they didn't hire an external architect. They rebuilt the thing with the local city architect. Let's see a couple of things. This is I find a really interesting scheme. So you see the hall, the SMAC museum, but the whole, so this was actually how the whole cluster in the park was activated at the opening night in 1999 of the museum. And this whole thing here, so the Congress Center with its extensions, is completely dark, so not participating. This is a very recent manifestation called SMAC is too small, SMAC is te klein, where they went out. And so we put again this idea on the table. This is now early 2020. And we proposed to the museum a threefold action, because of course, what we are doing now was, of course, it was a commission, but it was also partially being developed under the radar, because if we would go public immediately, the whole thing would not happen. Would not happen. So we proposed to produce a big model, a book, and thirdly, a public, by now a digital public event, aiming at, well, this is for today, this cluster with the Congress Center here, that this could become maybe in future a reality. So maybe slightly questioning is that, yes, we participated in a competition for a Congress Center. We even proposed kind of upgrades for the Congress Center. But thinking about it, I think it would be best if the Congress Center actually leaves the park, because all of a sudden, if you see this, right, this is a park. This is not a park. This is a park. So we developed, this is its first test model. I go quickly. And this is called then kind of doubled, very simple plan, kind of non-architectural ambitions, but more of a strategic scheme, 3D scheme, without the facades, with the facades. The model then got shipped to the SMAC, mounted. This is first encounter with the director. And then until 2 weeks ago was exhibited in the SMAC, so that the public in a way could get a kind of acquaintance with the possibilities for this future SMAC. In the meantime, we also took ample time to speak to a lot of politicians. This is the minister president at the highest level in Flanders. I think the picture was taken as a bad moment, but he liked the project. And again, you should imagine that nobody in a way is asking for this project. So we try to put on the table a kind of unsolicited proposal. And we've done this in a very thorough way. And I know by now we are very far from the original open call, but I just want to show you how it can evolve into maybe another opportunity or project. So this is then the press print. SMAC wants to clone itself, the book, the events, online. And our ambition in that sense is, we're sure of one thing, 100%, is we will not build this outcome. That's also not the ambition, but at the moment we are preparing a kind of to see how we could push it forwards towards what will become eventually, hopefully, an open call competition. So from an open call on a Congress center, we were civically disobedient. We thought another question was more important. We developed this question together with the client, in this case the museum, hoping that it can become another open call, to which we will not, of course, participate. And to wrap up, the whole thing for us actually can reside under this kind of notions called policy whispering. And I think that's what we try to do. That's what, as a practice, I think that's what we also have to do. And also during the 5 years of the Bouwmeester mandate, I think that's what we try to do, and through the open call, the pilot projects, the Labo Ruimte, is to whisper in a kind of unrelentless way. And sometimes it works, sometimes the ears were completely deaf, and sometimes, of course, you get punished for whispering. But policy whispering for us, if we understand it well, could be architecture's capacity to influence, and that's important, in a proactive manner. So we're not waiting for a question, we try to put the question on the table. So to influence in a proactive manner political policy, and this in favor of public interest. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter, for a very lovely lecture. Maybe if we can stop screen sharing so that we can have gallery view. Yeah, there we go. I believe Michael mentioned he had a question to get started.
Hi, Peter. Good afternoon. Thanks for your lecture. The timing of publication, or these public press moments, right? They seem very essential. You mentioned it several moments during this lecture. We're talking about SMAC, and there was this unwanted leak to the press about Antwerp to be split in half, right?
The coast.
Exactly, yeah. Sorry, indeed, the coast.
Almost there.
So that sparks some public debate, right? And to some extent, that's desired. Especially if I understand correctly, that's an essential part of the, let's say, the goals surrounding the organization around Vlaams Bouwmeester. So I was curious how you look at this. I mean, you showed a few of these screenshots of newspaper clippings where it indeed enters this public debate. But then I feel that there's, let's say, desired controversy or desired discussion and undesired. What's your view on this, or how would you maybe as in your previous role as Vlaams Bouwmeester, what would be an exciting way for this type of discussion to enter the public arena?
Well, maybe if we, for a moment, step away from whatever kind of position, I think globally speaking, in architectural discipline, and more specifically in the architectural practice, or at least that's how I can only understand it, architecture is a tool to debate, at full stop. And of course, there is sometimes desired and undesired debate. I think we're getting better and better to filter towards desired debate. But of course, you cannot rule out undesired debate as such. And even then, it can be sometimes a very nice discovery or surprise. But what's mainly maybe bugging me is that there is so little true debate going on, because of course, causing debate has to do with risk-taking. And apart from that, architectural practice is also has an office is filled with good people, and they don't work for free, so it has also an economical reality to it. So that balancing act between performing as a practice at the same time stirring certain debates on certain elements that you deem to be worthy or urgent. Yeah, for me, it's a natural condition, whether it's as an architect, private practice or public practice or whatever else, or if we try to write something or what I try to show here is that independent of the position you take on, I think that could be a kind of minimum installment of ambition. And again, even if you work for private clients, it always has a public outcome. So you better, I think, start the debate a bit beforehand, before it's too late. But of course, it can go in all directions. But that's, in a way, part of the game also. And I mean game in a positive way. Is that answering your question?
Yeah, I think so. Because especially the last example where you talk about smog and where you present it in this type of you really present it in almost an exhibition type space, right? And it turns into it really invites to for people to take part in it. Yeah, I was wondering if you, in some way,
if I may, just, sure. I think there's a big difference. I mean, yes, the exhibition from day one, so the moment we lost the first competition, we knew we started working with, in a way, with a new client or for a new client. Day one, we proposed a public moment to happen, let's say, a year later, which was a couple of weeks ago. Which could be, in a way, be seen as a form of going public, but not of participation. So, let's say the so-called forms of participation, which I'm slightly allergic to, or I don't buy as a real practice. I think here, what was really beautiful, especially now in Corona times, people had to follow a loop through the museum, so they had to pass by the room where the model was. And what you could also see is that people actually maybe didn't fully understand it, also are not awaiting or are not expecting to see a model in a museum, I think. And we were not there in a way at all, but the echoes I got from the staff that really also stirred debate within the room. And so I think it's these moments of going public are indeed extremely important and have to be strategized as much as possible. If you go too early, it's a no-go. If you go too late, you're too late.
Thank you. That's a great answer.
Thank you, Masha. Yeah.
I want to ask about modesty of Flemish architecture. I don't know. I myself often saw how the client itself want to make the most expressive architecture, or let's say the most modern architecture. So how you overcome this culture of iconic buildings, and if the style itself was the topic of discussion?
I think in those 5 years I had something like maybe 120 juries, and to my recollection, it was never about style. or we tried to push at least, so we were presiding the jury, although we didn't have kind of vote. And we tried to push beyond stylistic, almost fake issues. But the other problem was that very often, and I mean, that was really interesting to see, is that very often discussions were on where the toilets would be or whatever. And that's also something we tried to push out. So it was really about trying to find a middle ground, a positive middle ground, not as a compromise. Between what could actually be truly discussed in a competition environment. You cannot discuss the whole project. And for some projects, I mean, for instance, if I would detect a project which looked really fantastic, but was like where 100% sure it's 2 or 3 times over budget, I would advocate against this project, because then I think it's completely blinding the client's view on things. So I think our role was to be as honest as possible, but without any kind of, as much as possible, without any kind of preconceptions. And that's a very difficult exercise, but it's a really interesting exercise. And most of the time there was a kind of natural flux, and it ended where it should end, and at least it had the advantage of you spend more or less a day per client for the jury, because there's a lot of preparation and then all the presentations and then the discussion afterwards. And this day in a way was the biggest value also. So because it was almost like a kind of a little academy in a way of learning how to discuss a project. And also for us, because it was an eternal kind of learning environment, depending on what kind of client you have in front of you. So yeah, I think the stylistic issues or whatever, I don't think it's very interesting. I don't think also that architecture is actually about that. I think architecture is about spatial strategies with social purposes.
Thank you. Casper, I believe you had a question.
Yeah, hi. Peter, thank you very much for the insightful lecture. I was just wondering, because you told about how clients get into this open call program. I'm not completely sure I fully understand who gets in there and who doesn't, or whether it's an active search or something that people can apply to. So then my question would be, since this process is something that is maybe more elaborate and like integrated with systems in the government, does it take more time, and might that scare off interesting clients?
Normally goes quicker.
Okay, sounds good.
I mean, I said normally, not always, but because there was at the same time an active scouting, and also it's a kind of those public clients, they talk to each other. It's not a big region either. And so the ones you've already dealt with once often come back if they are, let's say, a city like Antwerp, for instance. I think by now came back for at least, 40 or 50 projects. Right? Although they also have their own city architects, but then the city architect joins in. So there remains some kind of regional overview, which I find quite interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that we tried to do in these 5 years, where we completely failed, was to try to internationalize the open call as a procedure. So we had talks with France, Germany, Holland, or Netherlands, Luxembourg, etc., and all of them would love to introduce the open call, but juridically it was always very difficult. And maybe something, I don't know if I mentioned it, but the open call was actually a copy of the Rijksbouwmeester's open call in the early 90s, mainly also under Jo Koenen. And then it got contextualized for Flanders. And yeah, so I still do hope that that's also why we give from time to time all these kind of lectures, is that some regions could pick up on it, but it's as you can see, I mean, the tricky part in the whole procedure is where you go from, you know, if for one open call, maybe, I don't know, 100 architects apply, and from those 100s, 10 are chosen by one person being the Bouwmeester. And that's the kind of tricky point. But again, I mean, so far it's always been a kind of gentleman-like environment where the architectural offices accept this, like I said, knowing that sometime sooner or later they will be chosen, maybe. Although by now, and that's maybe the bigger problem, the list of candidatures by the offices is so big, so long. So I think maybe 10 years ago you would have 30 candidates, and then to choose from 30 to 10, that's fairly easy. Now it's most of the time 100 candidates minimum, and then it becomes tricky as well. So I'm not sure if it's something that can remain. I hope it can remain.
I was wondering about that, because since you see you could actually say that it has more success, right? Because the pool becomes bigger.
It has more success because it's a one-in-a-kind procedure. So the whole of Europe, and even by now some American offices, Japanese offices have found their way in.
Yeah, that was maybe a follow-up question, if I may. Is it restricted to Flanders, or are you
international?
Like want to work internationally?
It's international. The only potential backdraw is that most of the time presentations should happen in Dutch. But that, I mean, you can always find your way around that in some way or another. And I think it's quite pleasant also to see offices from abroad, because, for instance, one of the hot discussions, well, quote unquote, hot discussions over the last year was, well, how many foreign offices can be allowed per open call? When Bob Vareet, so the first Bouwmeester, started, he had a kind of implicit rule saying, like, it's one foreign office, one young office, very young office. So one office where you know for sure that they can do it because they already did it. One office where you think, well, this could be interesting, but they never did it so far. And then one other but the fact that there it was quite clear there was one office from abroad and one very young office. And by now, I think these implicit rules are not so much practiced anymore, because it's also very difficult. You know, if you see, there's a fantastic the type of offices that subscribe. I mean, it's top notch. You know, so it's very hard to choose and not be crucified afterwards if you make it.
Is there one last final question? Well, we have two members in the audience. Yeah. Okay, we can continue. Yeah, go Heng.
Hello, Peter. My name is Heng. I'm joining from my classmates on laptop. So I wonder, do you have a survey or general understanding of how is these architecture competition outside the open calls, starting from 1999 to now? Because so is this kind of event arouse more public attention to this architecture tendering procedure, or just these clients started to really look into what they need for a new building?
So what exactly is the question?
So, I mean, can you talk more about the other this architecture competition situation beyond the open calls?
It's probably also what you know, no? As there is public and private tendering all over, no? And maybe a good thing, let's say that if you would compare it, let's say with 20 years ago, by now, even in the other public and private tendering procedures, at least they attempt to include what's then called quality, architectural quality, which I always have found a very difficult notion, because I wouldn't know what architectural quality actually is, because it's a very complex thing. But where maybe 10 or 15 years ago, the economical aspect would be crucial. So would get more points. Now you often see that there's a kind of 50-50 balance between economical proposal and the quality of a project. So that's, as such, objectively speaking, I think a very, very good evolution. Although I don't know if you ever participated in a jury session, being part as a jury member, it's always a very difficult discussion, very complex discussion to talk amongst different people about architectural quality and to synthesize unisono a clear assessment based on certain projects. It's much more easier, of course, to say, well, this is the cheapest and this one is more expensive, so he gets more or less points. But I think the open call in that sense, amongst other procedures, but have a beneficial effect, I think, in shifting this balance in percentages on how projects are credited. But you have to be careful all the time, I think. I mean, competitions it's a tricky thing. And I also do think that, or I hope that competitions, of course, we come from, at least in Belgium, we come from an era in the 80s, 1980s, long before you were born, from, I know you, you know me, boom, you have a commission, right? So the fact that this is now still happening, but not on a permanent basis, that's already a kind of little earthquake. But I don't think we can be satisfied with the condition as it is now. I think one has to be careful and to be proactive also there, to try to set out the rules or the systems for the future of something like an open call. It's always in evolution. It's never acquired or never set. It's and yes, it has helped, of course, a certain development of a building culture, but very quickly it could also produce something else. So, but I see now also the people at the team Vlaams Bouwmeester, so the team, I mean, they're still like, with big eyes and watching out to make sure that this procedure can survive in a good way and can develop also in a good way. So I'm pretty hopeful on that level.
Thank you.
Can I ask something if there's time?
Sure, Nietzsche.
So I had more technical question regarding the procedures of the open call, and you were talking about these guidelines just a few minutes ago, and some rules which keep on evolving and changing. So I was wondering if there have ever been any constraints for the applications or for the participants, architects and designers, in terms of financial turnovers or revenues. Because so I'm from India, and we recently had this competition which was hosted by the government, where it was about the parliamentary neighborhood. So it was a huge project in a way. But the last phase suddenly had this constraint of required turnover, and none of the younger architecture firms could participate. So I was thinking if there has ever been something like that.
Well, at the base, originally, it had none of those requirements, which was fantastic. What I see now, but it's not only for the open call, but let's say public tendering in general, led by, for instance, also so city architects, is that more and more these kind of requirements are slipping in again into the process. And on the one hand, I can understand it. It gives maybe a certain guarantee, although I think it's a false sense of guarantee. On the other hand, it's I think deeply worrying because again it's excluding a lot of potential young or smaller offices, resulting in in the end all the 20 or 40 same offices always are dealing the cards. And I know in the 5 years as Bouwmeester, I tried arduously to keep the conditions as low as possible. But we had almost permanently lawyers breathing in our neck because it is an exceptional state of procedure. And again, it makes you potentially vulnerable because you can be attacked. So as a team, you can be attacked at all times, which not often, but sometimes also happen, which is again part of the game. But so at the moment, no, and I hope it stays this way because it's crucial for keeping it as a unique procedure in that sense within the European context.
And just one more thing, if I may. So we had this reading prior to the lecture about the interview on open call. And I think I briefly read something about collaborations happening as well. So I was wondering if these collaborations take place after the 10 selected proposals and if there are, or is it a prior participation collaboration?
Well, you can apply in two ways, either in a solitary way, let's say, or you can apply with other peers or other practitioners. Then you make a kind of temporary vehicle for collaboration, and you see indeed more and more this type of collaborations happening. This could be good and this could be bad. Good in the sense that people are apparently interested in one another, if you would see it in a positive, maybe euphemistic way. Otherwise, of course, it's often also because sometimes you need to meet certain requirements, so you have to team up to get to the right references. But I'm also there, I'm still very hopeful, and I hope it's for the former and not the latter reason, that you actually are interested from practice to practice in one another, or that you at least want to attempt at opening up your own personal fields of working or way of working. But I know often it's the latter, of course.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. We have time for one last question. I know that Paul had a question for Peter, so I think it's nice to end with a question from somebody who is working within that context quite passionately and for a long time. Paul?
Okay, thank you, Solomon, and thank you, Peter, for your talk. I was rather more thinking of a comment than of a question, but I think I can bend it into a question as well. First of all, I wanted to thank you for your call, for your talk, for its clarity and its objectivity in about an experience that has been central to actually most of my professional life here in Flanders. And I was even touched emotionally by what you said and the way you said it, because I couldn't see any bitterness in it. You showed great resilience. I think when you were a Bouwmeester, you have not always been treated with in the kindest way. And still, when you talk, you mostly see successes. You mostly see doors that were opened. You mostly see influences on policies that could happen. And you're still to be still on speaking terms with these politicians, which are so often were the reasons why you would simply not want to start with it at all. It's a personal comment. Well, I think what my question then would be, if I would bend it into a question, would be if you can give us some reflections on the balance between diplomacy and an urge for experiments. Please, Peter, do.
I feel that there should be a kind of sub-question following still, no?
Well, the sub-question is that, well, I often see that possibilities for experimentation are not really appreciated. The open call is a procedure that would have to allow for it, but often risks is not appreciated. Well, I think it was very clear in what you said yourself about ominous competition on the Citadel Park, the whole thing around the SMAC, etc. So actually, what I mostly experience in Flanders is a deep need for risk avoidance, for escaping debates, or to having debates in prefabricated formats, which simply do not allow for the more sensitive experiments. So I often feel that there is very little openness towards fresh ideas or new ways to look at things, or to simply go beyond the most easy way to deal with something.
Maybe if I'll have an attempt to answer you. And I'm very happy to see you in the audience, because now I should normally look at the audience. Paul was very instrumental at the origin also of the whole operation of the Bouwmeester. So that's, I think, good to know as well. Diplomacy. I remember, if I take the example of the ECC Congress Center and the SMAC, at some point, I think by now there's no more secrecy about it, of the jury. At some point we got the question, imagine you will get the commission, but you have to abort the SMAC reflection. Would you stay on board? And I said no. So that's not a very diplomatic answer, of course, and it's maybe not even a smart answer at first view. But it was, in that sense, a truthful answer, because I cannot imagine that for a park like the Citadel Park, which is, I think, a very important location also for the wider context, that you would only ask a question for one of the partners, and then again link one of those partners to, in this case, a Floralia hall. Is beyond my comprehension. And then, I remember when we first got the brief, or even just reading the announcement. I think the first thing I did, I went to the museum director, Philip van Kouteren, to say, well, why are you not mentioned in the brief? And I thought that all 5 practices would do so, just to have a kind of gentle exchange.
Yeah, it was the elephant in the room, so to speak.
But apparently, yes. And gradually we discovered also certain reasons why, which is very interesting. But it didn't mean that we were, let's say, aborting the whole thing. For me, it remains crucial. And we are still working with the SMAC at the moment. So, and we'll see where it ends. Like I said, one thing we know for sure, and we are not doing this project, but we help to prepare the project. And I think from hopefully a fresh position, a kind of fresh point of view, because we don't have an agenda apart from the fact to try to create the best possible guarantees for a future SMAC museum. And a similar thing I try to do with the MUCA, but there you know also how it turned out. But apart from that, I still do believe deeply in this kind of very early on in the process, where in a way almost nobody's addressing a question or even watching towards a certain direction. I mean, we're all free human beings, so we can interchange and we can ask questions. And this is how the SMAC thing started. And I remember when we went public, I said, I think, 2 sentences on the fact that, you know, within a competition sphere, we could not ever develop the project or the pre-project we developed for the SMAC. And this got me a very aggressive comment of one of the architectural critics, saying like, dare you comment on the procedure of architecture competitions? But yes, I think we have to, I dare to, and I think we should look for and find other ways of engaging with future clients, which maybe we don't have to do the whole thing, right? But it's not only about building, it's also about building, but not only about building. And to be honest, the SMAC procedure, I see it as I hope that it's seen as a support, for instance, to the team Vlaams Bouwmeester. In a way, it's a similar kind of action or activity. And it's out there, the publication is out there, so there are no hidden agendas. And I do like this kind of practice, I must admit. And hopefully the debate that spurs from it. And again, it can go in different directions, but there also I have to acknowledge that it's very hard to have, like you said, like to have a real debate on it. I mean, I'm still waiting for it actually. And it's not too late, of course, but I hope it's coming soon.
Yeah, maybe just one last, I know we said Paul's, we have the last comment or question, but maybe just one a very short question from Daniel, as somebody who has been as an international architect working within Flanders. Daniel, do you have a quick comment or a question before we end?
Yes, thanks, Salomon. Hello, Peter. Thanks for the lecture. Well, I suppose maybe just contextualize what I'm about to ask you. You know, as a very young practice, we won a large cultural competition through a very interesting procedure there, actually, where we entered a master plan in an open competition. Having won, we were allowed to be a finalist on a shortlist of 5 as a sort of young office in amongst people who built. This wasn't in Belgium, this was in Norway. And we built, as a result, we won those buildings, we built them. And despite the fact that they've won every major award in Norway and been on lots of other international awards, we never got shortlisted for another competition there again. And at the same time, we did a true collaboration, I think, a desire to work together with Jan de Wilde Interieur, as they became, which we also won a couple of months after winning the one in Norway. And we built that project. And they kind of finished around the same time. And at that time, we were in a complete quandary as a young office about what to do. We'd finished a big building, a medium-sized building. We had nothing else to do. And we set ourselves the goal in 5 years of trying to gain another cultural project. And the open call system has really been our savior. I mean, it's kind of allowed our office to develop, and we now have a wide. I mean, we're almost exclusively working in Belgium. Strangely, I mean, we have a little bit of work in London, and one other project somewhere else. But I mean, it's almost exclusively Belgian work, and you can see that the openness that it's brought in to. Not just to Flemish practice, but to a kind of much broader section of international practice. There are lots of other UK architects, for example, who are looking to Belgium for all the reasons that you said, because it's not about whether you don't have to have built the same thing in 5 years. You don't have to have minimum turnovers, all of that kind of stuff, and that's been a kind of extraordinary opportunity, I think, for practices like ours. I know, I mean, we won this project for the opera in Ghent last year, and there was real controversy because that was a purely international shortlist. There were no Flemish offices on the shortlist, and it caused a great deal of consternation. I think a very understandable consternation. I mean, we totally understand it, although it was interesting that we were, you know, some of the commentary was about big offices coming from other places and kind of stealing practices. I mean, we are quite a small office, so it was kind of, I think we felt slightly tarred by a big brush, but nonetheless, I mean, I think we really understood, you know, that the concern that somehow, you know, the kind of opening up of the open call and its success had led to, you know, in a way, a kind of sidelining of Flemish practice. And that isn't really what I wanted to ask you. I wanted to ask you in a way the kind of obverse, because, you know, it also seems to me that you can say that something of the kind of power and position of Flemish practice in particular on the kind of international stage seems to have happened and developed at in the same trajectory as the open call. And I wondered if you would talk a little bit about what you think the open call's done for Belgian architecture on a kind of international stage.
Well, I think it has done a lot, but it cannot be brought back to the open call, or I hope not. If we look back a bit more, 1986, Marc de Gois and Christian Kikes, I'm not sure if they are known, but check them out. Both fantastic architects, the one building, the other one writing mainly. They started Stichting Architectuurmuseum, so Foundation, Architecture Museum Foundation. And they took it, while practicing, they took it on board to actually help a whole generation of architects, by now probably established ones, to go to Venice, to go to other venues, and in a very brief amount of time, couple of years. So from when there was nothing, really nothing on an architectural, I mean, at least not for 60 years or 50 years, no, 30 years, sorry. They managed to actually set out a kind of generational vibe, which of course is always a bit haphazard or a bit, and that was the actual moment where this current, maybe still buzz on Belgian architecture, although I'm not sure if it's a buzz or should be a buzz. Actually, there it started. And then from those architects, I mean, all those architects had in common that they were strong designers or strong architectural thinkers, often both, but also were good advocates for the discipline. So beyond their own kind of practice or their own kind of work. And I think that stirred the whole thing in a rather short amount of time. Then, of course, there was also, at least, I mean, something which is also present in Holland, the yearbooks, which don't know by heart when I think the first one came out. There, Paul has to help me, 92?
Yeah.
Yeah. A bit later than Stichting Architectuurmuseum, but still on the same vibe. And again, also, these people were also very much involved in this setup. And then in 1999, you had Team Vlaams Bouwmeester. In a way, you could say, well, what's the next kind of step? Because now maybe we should have a next installment of another tool, let's say, or another modus to make sure. I mean, and it's all about creating opportunities and chances, let's say, to be able to question and sometimes even practice, but to ask questions. I think all these instruments and also Stichting Architectuurmuseum for me was a tool to problematize things, not only just to, it's not a promoting tool. It was mainly promote, but of course I don't know how they did it back then, but it went extremely fluid, I think, as a kind of, and it went immediately international. So it's not only the open call.
No, I guess, but I mean, interestingly, you know, you can look at things like the 9H gallery that was happening in London at a similar time, and you know, if you look at the generation of architects that comes out of that, you know, Carissa St. John, Surgeson Bates, etc., etc. You know, there's a similar kind of flowering, if you like, that happened over a similar time frame, and yet actually almost without exception, they had to look for their opportunities elsewhere. You know, so they end up working in Belgium, or they end up working in Switzerland, or they end up working somewhere else. You know, and I think I suppose looking from the outside, that seems to me the difference, that a vehicle was developed that allowed opportunities to happen within what's, you know, really quite a small territory, in a very different way to, you know, what's happened in the UK. I mean, it's sort of very interesting. We're at the sort of very young, rather inconspicuous end of that generation of architects, and if you go somewhere else, they get spoken about as what British architecture is, but of course they don't practice here. You know, and that seems quite different to what happened in Flanders. So I mean, it's, you know, looking from the outside, the open call feels like very central as a kind of as a mechanism.
Indeed, but I still, I mean, so yes, I'm optimistic and hopeful. At the same time, I'm extremely disappointed about the fact what I said earlier on, that the internationalization or the kind of spreading out, or having other types of similar kind of procedures, practices, what have you, at least on a European level. I mean, I cannot understand why this is not fully blossoming. Because imagine if you would have open call times, I don't know, 20 per country. Wow.
I proposed it for London, where as a kind of aftermath of Brexit, I started this whole conversation about the fact that maybe it wouldn't work in a country of 60 million, but if you did it just in London, then, you know, actually it's the size of Flanders. You know, you could kind of think about it as a vehicle for London. Unfortunately, they just kind of repeated the same system that they had in place before. But I think London would be a very interesting place to think about the open call.
Absolutely. Or certain parts of London anyway.
Mm-hmm. North London.
Well, thank you for the lecture, Peter. I also thank the students and Paul and Daniel for engaging in a very nice conversation afterwards, Peter. I think you unwrapped a very important set of issues for the future of architecture, which all of our students are essentially questioning every day. What will be my place or position after leaving the academy again? So after having been in practice, at least related to the Berlage students. So thank you very much. Have a great afternoon, and we hope to see you in person at another moment. So maybe just a round of applause so that we can have some momentum. Everybody off mute so we can hear sounds. I'm only hearing myself here, but thanks so much, Peter, and have a wonderful day. And thank you again for your camaraderie in giving the lecture with a specific